year, 196 million pairs of shoes are made in this country. We import a further 63 million, making a grand total of 259 million. That's an awful lot of shoes, but how many of them actually fit us? You've got all the choice in the world if you're what the manufacturers euphemistically call average, but how many of us are average these days?
I think there are lots of women that now have large feet, and I think feet are getting bigger. But I think the thing is that the shoe manufacturers don't just bother about women with large feet. That's the long and short of it, as one might say.
There's no doubt about it. Big feet are a problem, but they're not alone. At the other end of the scale is Mrs. Short's friend, Ruth Orbach.
I think the size is quite normal. It's about a 4.5 or an American 6. But it's a question of the width, which happens to be double A, supposed to be very elegant, very high class, but you can't get shoes to fit it in this country.
Well, have you got any idea whether you are, in fact, a minority group, or whether there are other women around like you who have the same problem? Well, one has different experiences. Sometimes if you go into a shop that you've not tried before, perhaps in another town, you know, where you don't know the shops, and you ask for this 10.5 B or C fitting, sometimes the assistants will look down their noses and try to reduce you to that size. They're with me, they find this difficult. Oh no, we don't stock that size. In other shops where the manager is perhaps more honest, he'll say, yes, we have great demand for large sizes, but we find that as soon as we get stocks in, they've gone. You know, the women seem to know, and they go very quickly. And I think there's a great deal of medical evidence now to show that children are in fact bigger and heavier than they were, say, 10 or 15 years ago. And this is obviously going to be reflected in foot sizes. And I think that it's absolutely true of adolescent girls, that they have bigger feet now than perhaps we had when we were that age.
And this is where the problem starts over and over again, fashion. A pair of perfectly normal, healthy 14-year-old feet can become aching and deformed like these in just a few years as a result of shoes built for fashion instead of fit.
Have either of you ever found that you've compromised and maybe bought a shoe that wasn't the right fitting?
Oh, yes, and of course it's murderous for your feet. Until comparatively recently, as I say, no manufacturers really made anything bigger than 7 or 7.5. And then you just had to shove your feet into shoes that were obviously too small. And I think that most of women's foot troubles come from this fact that they can't get shoes that properly fit their feet. And of course, corns are bad enough, but I think bunions are really the worst thing when it pushes the, you know, this big toe joint across the foot like that. And this is dreadfully painful.
No foot specialist will accept that a truly fashionable shoe will give a perfect fit, but surely they could be made to fit better than they do.
Well, in fact, most fashion shoes are only made in one fitting. Now, a fitting, you understand what I mean by a fitting, is the girth measurement round the fore part of the foot. And most fashion shoes only come in the one fitting, which is a B. Presumably, if they came in 2 or 3, a few other people would be slightly better fitted than they are at the moment. But the main problems with fashion shoes are also the fact that they are fashion shoes, that they don't stay on the foot very well, and even if they are well fitted, there is difficulty because they only stay on by being tight at the heel and the toe.
It's not simply the length of the foot that counts for a perfect fit, the width is all important too, and yet the majority of fashion shoes are made for Mrs. Average with a B fitting.
Well, because I think a B is probably the fitting that fits the most people. It's the most commonly asked for one. And also, of course, it is an expensive operation to make shoes in lots of different fittings. It's expensive for the manufacturer when they want reds and blues and greens and blacks. And it's also very expensive in shelf space for the retailer to keep them in a lot of fittings. And since the majority of people are probably quite happy with a B fitting, why should they worry further?
What's your main problem with your feet?
It's the bottoms, you know, the callouses and the bunions, but they spoil the shape of my shoes and that, but they don't hurt at all, you know, and if I got tight shoes. And my nails, I can't really cut them myself, they're so hard.
What do you think caused this?
I think it was cheap shoes, you know, when I was younger, used to buy. And the high heels we used to wear when we was teenagers.
Did you realise how important good fitting shoes were then?
No, I didn't really.
What's the special condition? They seem to turn over, don't they?
Yes, I've had that for quite a long time. Probably through ill-fitting shoes when I was young.
What, you forced your feet into tightly fitting shoes when you were a kid, did you?
Well, not when I was a child, but when I started buying my own shoes and followed the fashion, which were very narrow shoes. In those days, pointed toes were about. High heels, pushing your feet forward, of course. And, well, I just put up with it. I bought shoes were shoes, and it didn't matter as long as they fitted me in the shop, it was all right.
It's not just shoes that are too tight that cause the problems. Big, sloppy, apparently comfortable ones are as bad. It's as important for a shoe to fit as well at the heel as it does across the toe, which is all very well, but what about fashion? It's no accident that 90% of all chiropody patients are women who've been slaves to fashion since they were so high.
If you take a child, say, of 11, 12, or even, and then above, to a shoe shop and suggest they wear round-toed lace-up shoes, they will not do it. They'll pick a low-cut casual shoe or one of these great clompy things that has no support across the instep so that the foot rides forward in the shoe and the toes buckle to hold it on, and therein lies the trouble.
The British Shoe Corporation claim they make shoes from size 2 to 12. Fine, but where do we buy them? There are other manufacturers who've always catered for the long and short end of the shoe trade, sensible, fitting, and very dull. But things are looking up, and they're trying for fashion with fit. Even so, if every customer was to be satisfied, how many shoes would have to be waiting on the shelf?
Thousands and thousands. If you think about it, that you have 13 length sizes in a range from 45 to 105 in ladies' shoes. You have 6 with fittings, and then you have 5 or 6 colours. That comes to some 350 shoes to hold one of each in the shop. And it's quite impossible, therefore, to hold all of the ranges in the shop like this.
And if all sizes and styles were there for the asking, surely the price of shoes would go rocketing up. Mrs. Short?
Well, I don't mind how we do it, but I think that all shoe manufacturers, without exception, ought to make a wider range, both in length and in with fittings of women's shoes. And these ought to be available in all shoe shops. I mean, why should we have to find out by trial and error that there are only 3 or 4 shops in London, for example, where you can get these are rather difficult fittings?
And at popular prices.
And, of course, the price range is important, because I think that, you know, 13 to 18 guineas is out of the reach of the average working woman. She can't afford it. I wouldn't pay that sort of price. And so I think that in the normal price ranges, we ought to be able to find shoes that fit whatever the size of our feet.